sounds great. Okay, so we're just going to wait 2 more minutes to see who this person is, and then we'll get started. Oh, I see Eric. Oh, I see Eric. Now I have an echo.
Is Lottie Spady on the call yet?
I am here.
All right, Lottie. Hey, Stephen here.
Hi, Stephen and everyone.
Hey. Hey. So, Niaz, I see you now. That's great. Hi. Hi. Okay. Well, we're waiting and hoping that Rosalinda is so I'm just going to give it 1 more minute and then we'll get started.
Hi folks, I would suggest that if you are not speaking, please mute yourself so we can reduce the echo in the call.
Okay, so I'm hoping that Rosalinda will be able to join us eventually, but we're just going to get started so that we can stay on track. Thank you all for being here today. My name is Zoe Brent from Food First in Oakland, California, and I've been asked to help facilitate this call today. So we are hoping to deepen our political analysis of land and resource issues in the U.S. today collectively and with the help of some of our presenters today. So I'm really excited to hear from Niaz and Blain and hopefully Rosalinda and Eric. So I'd like to start quickly by doing a round of introductions just so that we know who's here. And then Stephen and Lottie, I'll hand it over to you to do a special dedication of this call to Charity Hicks. So let's get started and go around and do some introductions. Maybe we can start with the folks who have called in on the phone, whose names I can't see, and then we can go down the list of participants in the upper right that have logged on online. That sounds good? So if somebody, how about let's go in the way that we did last call geographically. Maybe we can start with participants who've called in from the East Coast. Jump on in there and just say your name and where you're calling from, please.
Hi, this is Dawn Plummer calling in from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Thank you.
I'm with the Friends of the MST and was recently with the Poverty Initiative, and I'm now with the Pittsburgh Food Policy Council.
Thanks.
Hey, this is Amy Laura Cohn calling from the Garden Justice Legal Initiative and Neighborhood Gardens Trust and the Food Policy Council here in Philadelphia.
Hi, this is Rachel from National Family Farm Coalition in DC.
And hi, Irene. I see that you're calling in from Kentucky and your microphone's not working, but we're glad to have you here.
Hi, this is Steve Bartlett, also from Louisville, Kentucky, with Agricultural Missions.
And this is Tristan.
Allison. I'm just listening.
Oh, and Beatrice from Why Hunger. We're listening.
Great. Is that all of our East Coast folks? Sorry, who was that from the Farm Coalition?
Hi everyone, this is Saulo, Why Hunger?
Okay, so if there's nobody else on the East Coast, maybe we can move westward. Anyone from Midwest?
This is Liz Calvin with Agricultural Missions, and I'm in Missouri.
Cynthia Price of the Greater Food Systems Council.
This is Jahi Chappelle.
Oh, sorry. And on the planning committee for the National Days of Action.
Great.
This is Jahi Chappelle at the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy in Minneapolis.
This is Aaron Handelsman from Detroit with the Detroit People's Platform and the Community Land Trust Coalition.
All right. Anyone else from the Midwest?
I'm sorry, this is Lottie from Detroit. My phone dropped right quick. Lottie from Food Justice Task Force.
Yeah, this is Maria Aguiar. I'm sorry, I just joined late with the tech team for Via Campesina North America.
Hi, Maria. Anyone else calling in from the Midwest or the South?
This is Deepa Panchang with Other Worlds in New Orleans.
Good to have you.
Hey.
Okay. And we can keep moving west towards the West Coast.
Hi, this is Pam Brubaker in California with Ag Missions. Could you hear me?
This is Eric Holt.
Yes.
This is Eric Holt-Gimenez with Food First.
Any other West Coasters? Or anyone else that we have missed in our round of introductions?
This is Niaz from Massachusetts. I don't know if I introduced myself.
Glad to have you here.
Thank you.
And once again, my name is Zoe Brent from Food First in Oakland, California. So thanks all for being here. Before we get into our discussion and presentations, I'd like to hand it over to Steve and Lottie. We're going to do a dedication of this call to Charity Hicks. Would you guys like to take over?
Thank you very much, Zoe. Yeah, just this is we're going to read a litany, and maybe if we can all sort of get into the space thinking about how Charity, who got hit by a car, how she's going to heal and come back to us. So, you ready, Lottie?
I am ready. Thank you.
Okay, Lottie has agreed to read one of the voices, so here we go. Healing comes from Mother Earth.
Healing comes from the Sun Spirit.
Healing comes from spirit, from the source.
We call on healing to come for Sister in Struggle, Charity Hicks.
We pray for powerful healing for Charity.
Charity fights for justice, for truth.
She speaks truth to power and builds power from truth.
Her arms embrace what is good.
Though we are far away, we embrace Charity in her time of need.
We lift Charity up in our thoughts, in our visualizations of her.
Beautiful Sister Charity, come back from brokenness to health.
We need you in the struggle. We need your fierce words, your sharp intellect.
We need your courage, your endurance, your enthusiasm.
We need you with us, Sister Charity Hicks.
We need you with us, Sister Charity Hicks. We send you our positive energy.
We send you our love.
Viva Charity.
Viva.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was wonderful. I see Edgar has arrived from community to community development, but Edgar, you're saying you're not able to call in. Is that still the case? Perhaps Tristan or Saulo, maybe you could help him via chat while we get started with Niaz's presentation so that he can jump in after. Is that doable? Thanks. Okay, so getting started with our agenda for the day, for this call. The idea is to hear from Niaz, from Blain, and from Edgar a bit about their views. We've asked each of our three speakers 3 questions just to sort of guide the discussion a bit. So first we've asked them what is the reality of land and natural resource control in their communities? What types of actions do their organizations or other organizations engage in to address those issues? And how might a National Day of Action support the work of grassroots organizations? So I think without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Niaz, who's the coordinating director of the Northwest Atlantic Marine Alliance, and you'll see there's a bit more in her bio here. We're very glad to have you here. So why don't you go ahead and take it from there. We're thinking you'll speak for about, each of the presenters will go for about 10 minutes, and then we'll do about 20 minutes of open discussion. So write down and save your questions. Okay?
Okay, great. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this conversation and inviting us in the fisheries topic to be part of this conversation. And thank you for the thoughts about Charity. Certainly she's been talked about and brought up in the context of where I am at the moment, which is the New England Food Summit 2014, and considering the center of this work, or this work we're doing together at the summit, is centered around the issues of food justice and racial equity. She's in our thoughts because of the brave work that she's done on that topic, and you guys made me cry, so I'm sniffling still a little bit. In terms of the 3 questions, what's the reality, what are the actions we're taking, and how a National Day of Action can help or can bolster this work? The reality we're dealing with in the fisheries world is that for the past roughly 20 years, maybe a little bit more, the a strategy of privatizing and taking fisheries out of the public commons and regarding them as an investment, as a commodity, as a right to be owned by people who don't even fish, has been shopped around as a strategy for achieving sustainability when it comes to our actions on the ocean. So we're being sold this bill of goods about how ownership equals stewardship. And what we're finding is as these policies are being implemented, whether it's in the U.S. or around the globe, we're not only losing access to fisheries by traditional people who have fished, small-scale, medium-scale communities, but we're actually undermining the very basic tenet that these strategies were sold to us around, which is saving the fish, because at this point we're not even doing that. But what we have done is we have brought investors in Wall Street and banks. In fact, one of them, if I were in the room with all of you and I could see all of you, I would ask you to raise your hand if you eat clam chowder. And if you eat clam chowder, what if you knew that the clams in the majority of the chowder you ate, the rights to catch those clams are actually owned by 3 banks in the UK, when the fishing for the clam chowder in the US is being done here in the Mid-Atlantic region. And what if you knew that that privatization strategy that has privatized the rights to fish for clams and quahogs that ends up in our clam chowder has gone from having a whole bunch of boats from all the way down to South Carolina up to even parts of Maine fishing for clam chowder small bits at a time, to having a very consolidated, vertically integrated industry in all the bad ways that are controlling the rights to fish for that particular species. They haven't reduced the amount of clams and chowder that we eat, but they've consolidated so that the number of people who are actually fishing for them have reduced. And with that has come the similar consequences that we've seen with land grabs and the loss of agriculture access by farmers to land, which is we've lost infrastructure, we've lost jobs, we've lost economic prosperity in those communities, the wealth has left, the clams have left, the fish have left, and all of this is really being driven by, frankly, a handful of it started with a couple of environmental organizations, and I used to work for Greenpeace, and I'm glad Greenpeace isn't supporting these ideas. But even at Greenpeace at the time, when we heard about the idea of privatizing species of fish that have not yet even spawned in perpetuity for companies and corporations and banks to own those animals before they have even given birth to their offsprings, just didn't seem right. And it seemed contrary to our basic belief that the natural environment is no one's to own, and that our right to eat from it should be treated very carefully and with a lot of respect. And what we found is that this notion is being perpetuated in the name of sustainability. Governments and collaborations of organizations and NGOs have embraced this idea that if you own the right to fish, somehow you're going to be a better caretaker of it. Because on the flip side, we're seeing the opposite. And we're seeing the real caretakers, the traditional, the small scale, the indigenous fishing communities going by the wayside, disappearing, losing access, losing resources because of these strategies. So not only are we not saving the fish, we are actually losing a way of life and a way of access that has the potential to actually achieve the ecological objectives that we want and we feel is important. In terms of actions we're taking, these policies are being implemented strategically from a standpoint of organizing. The organizations that are supporting it are actually looking at where there are vulnerable areas where they can actually go in and manipulating in many ways the community organizing strategies that many of us use to go in with this predetermined outcome of privatization. We just had our Fish Locally Collaborative Assembly where we had fishermen from Belize there, and when they laid out what is being told to them and how they're being approached, it was pretty clear that their communities were essentially, for lack of a better term, being infiltrated by those who want to see this outcome happen. And instead of having them participate, they're simply being told what they should be accepting. And on the horizon is the potential of the Belize fisheries to be to be privatized. So the action that we've taken is where policies that are privatizing the marine environment are being sought out or implemented, we're working to either stop them or the best word we can use is fix them. For example, here in New England, this policy was put into effect in 2010, and we saw a very rapid decline in the number of particularly small and medium-scale fishing operations and the consolidation, excuse me, of the rights to fish into fewer and fewer hands, excuse me, who are not only controlling the right to fish, they're controlling the processing, they're controlling even the permit banks, which are supposed to be the equivalent of the land trust, and who gets access to those permit banks, who gets access to the financing that gives you access to release the right to fish from the person who has chosen or has the resources to buy it. And so we, here in New England, we tried to put into place what we call safeguards so that the small and medium scale operators are not compromised in this process, that the marine environment is not compromised in this process, that future fishermen and women who currently cannot enter a fishery because the cost of leasing the right to fish and the cost of the permit became astronomically out of reach after this privatization scheme put into place. People who literally filed for a permit to fish many years ago with the price of a postage stamp became literally overnight millionaires. Many of them have chosen not to sell their permit, but instead lease their permit to fishermen who in turn have to pay on top of all their other costs, the cost to lease fish, and what that has led is further decline in their income. And so as a result, they're faced with the choice of, do I get more financing and buy permits and get more leases, and essentially do I get to scale up or do I get to get out? And what we find is many of the small and medium scale folks will choose to get out because they're frustrated by a system that is not only marginalizing them but is undermining the health of the marine ecosystem. So putting these safeguards in place where that's appropriate, opposing these strategies when we are ahead of the game enough to be able to do that, organizing in the communities to have fishermen understand and actually tell us what are the consequences of all of this, and understand what allies there are out there, what are the resources they can tap into should they choose to oppose these strategies. And how a National Day of Action can work is, this is a frustrating conversation in many ways, because what we're told is that this is what we need to do to save the fish. And I feel majority of the public has bought that hook, line, and sinker, pardon the pun. And we need that shift in thinking that these strategies are only on the sustainability element, the environmental stewardship element is a way to get us to warm up to a strategy that we should be fighting to begin with. They're using the right words to entrap the public in a sense. So a Global Day of Action can help change that narrative, turn that conversation around, help people understand that you are, unbeknownst to you maybe, you are being accepting of strategies that are going to be taking away your access to the ocean. Because this is not, these strategies aren't only happening when it comes to the right to fish, it's happening when we are participating in the national ocean policy and the marine spatial planning process, for example, where they are literally drawing lines in the ocean and saying, this is where we're going to lease to the oil and gas companies, that's where we're going to go and lease to the mining companies, and that's where we're going to do X kind of extraction. So once we accept it, as we have, I think the demonstration is once we accept it that it's okay to give away land on land, we somehow think it's okay because precedence has been set to give land that's below water or resources that are below water. So we need to really shed some light on this, that there is some untruths being spoken about these strategies, and the only way that fishermen can be empowered to speak truth to these untruths is for others to echo that, because they do feel alone, they feel marginalized, they feel as though they've been relegated to the rapers and pillagers category, and somehow that has allowed these conversations to emerge around these wrongful strategies that have major social, environmental, economic, and food system consequences. So our hope is that we can, our network has broadened from where we were a few years ago as a fledgling small New England network to now having fishermen in Europe and Asia and in Americas and all continents actually at this point, to share the same understanding, have a shared sense of what needs to be done, but they still need a broader movement to step in and support them, have their backs, and be able to spread the message far and wide. And let me just close by saying how important this having their back is. It really is. What we're finding is when fishermen, even those who feel empowered to speak up, when they speak up, they're being threatened often by those who are holding these rights to fish. Once it's gone public that a fisherman has spoken up, because these people who own the rights to fish are also owning the permit banks and the processing, they are being economically blackmailed. They're not going to be given the right to fish, or they're not going to be allowed to lease from that particular permit bank, or the processor won't buy their fish. So the more that's exposed, the more sunlight is shed on the control that these policies are placing in communities and on fishermen, the more fishermen can speak up, even though they know there's going to be economic and social backlash in their own communities. But if they know others are supporting them, they can be brave, because that's what they need to be.
Thank you so much, Niaz. That was great. So what I'm going to do is have all three presenters speak, and then we'll do questions all together, sort of panel format, if that's all right with folks. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the floor over to Blain Snipstal, who's a returning generation peasant farmer, organizer, artist, and seed keeper of Afro-Indigenous ancestry based in Baltimore, Maryland. He's also part of the International Youth Articulation of La Via Campesina, and he serves as a board and farm member of the Southeastern African American Farmers Organic Network, the only African American organic farming network in the Southeastern United States. So we're delighted to have you here, Blain. I'll go ahead and give you the floor for 10 to 15 minutes to share your thoughts.
Okay, thanks. Well, first, I just want to give thanks for being on the call and have an opportunity to share and listen with folks. And I want to revisit our homage to Charity, a good friend of mine, and I just want to say, what up, though? She always greets me and folks with that, and so too do many of our comrades from Detroit do.
Mm-hmm.
Now, yeah, Lottie. And now to the first question, what is our, what is the reality in which we're living within or organizing within? And first, I wanted to acknowledge, just because where I live on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, you drive to the farm, and they always remind you that where I live is the first English settlement in the Mid-Atlantic region. And that always strikes me because, I think we need to continue to acknowledge that, we lay our heads in the issue that started centuries ago, and that, we exist on one of the greatest land and ocean and culture grabs in human history. And so, I think when folks speak about a food system or transforming a food system, for me and the communities that I have a privilege to be a part of, often it's more so a battle of a model of agriculture. And within that model of agriculture, a model of land ownership and property valuation and capital accumulation and so forth. And so the food system is located within that model of agriculture, and the model of agriculture, which is an extension of plantation agriculture from the 1600s and on, is the capitalist model of industrial agriculture. And I wanted to name that from the very beginning to understand and to draw lines with what Niaz had mentioned earlier, that also too pertains to the oceans and basically every other resource in which we live upon on this planet. In the 1970s, again, just to give another context, in the 1970s, 1976 report was issued by the Federation of Southern Cooperatives and another organization called the Emergency Land Fund, and the title report was only 6 million acres. And it came at the tail end of basically the civil rights movement in the rural countryside, when it became very apparent that the rapid loss and dispossession of African American and indigenous lands were only increasing, and they were rapidly increasing. And it stated that within the black population, we controlled and owned only 6 million acres, whereas 50 years earlier, the number was around 23 million acres. And by that time, we had already lost almost 95% of all black landowners and black farmers, whether sharecroppers or tenant farmers. And so when we see some statistics like was mentioned in the promo material for today, about 97% of all land is owned by whites, there is a process that has been in play to produce this current context. And it's not by happenstance. There has been clear mechanisms and political policies and social behavior that has brought us to this moment, very intentionally so. And so that's just some of the context within sort of the black agrarian tradition, in which I am a part of, and folks I'm in community with are a part of. And so when you have a situation where there has been a mass removal of peoples from the land, so too then you begin to see this disconnection or this disruption in the ancestral knowledge process, which is vital to agriculture, which is critically vital to agriculture, to be able to exist in the environment and produce food for people, whether it be in the oceans or on the land, in harmony with nature. And when there's this disruption, in which what we have currently now, destruction takes place. And not only destruction, consolidation of power, and certain cultural tendencies begin to show themselves. And so because of my, I'm a young person, and in farming and agriculture, we have begun to organize ourselves. I'm just going to speak locally first, and then move a bit broader. We have begun to organize ourselves in a couple of different ways to begin to address and reconnect ourselves to our ancestral knowledge and that process that I spoke to. And in this, some major challenges have arisen, in the sense that people in my generation and even 10, 15, 20 years older, everyone always says don't come from a farming family. Well, it's not that we don't come from farming families. It's just that we have not been on land to farm. That in many regards, most of our parents or grandparents came from farming families, have the knowledge in play, but because of dispossession and then forced migration into cities, we've not been able to re-exercise that knowledge. And so a lot of the spaces that we've been opening up here in Maryland have been to literally infiltrate cities into people of color spaces and ask them to come to the farm and to engage in cultural and political debates and trainings, but also to engage in practical agricultural hands-on training in the countryside. And we found that to be quite successful, very small in our nascent stages, but very, very successful, because far too often do our systems in play remove culture from every part of our lives and then fill it with consumerism and materialism and whatnot. And we found that in order to bridge this divide, culture and recognizing our ancestral and traditional knowledge is critically important to doing so within the framework of agroecology. As mentioned before, I'm also part of the Rural Coalition, and with Angela Adrar, we support the Rural Coalition within La Villa Campesina North America, and we've been working with a very close member and sister organization, the Florida Farm Workers Association of Florida, to develop an agroecology process and encounter in Florida, focused on the traditions and the historical legacies of struggle in the Southeast. And I wanted to just put that out there. I'm not going to speak too much beyond that, beyond the point to just acknowledge that, it's one thing to speak about our context and our reality and all these problems and stuff happening, but it's very important for us to stress that there are solutions and there are activities and processes happening on the ground in the grassroots amongst autonomous people of color spaces that are radically working to transform our material conditions. How can the National Day of Action help? Well, I think Niaz hit the head on the nail with sort of rethinking the narrative and perception. You know, there's been all these documents and these reports that come out over the years about who feeds the world and how do we feed them and this, that, or the other. But, you know, we have this sort of, for better or for worse, this local food movement here in the, well, food category, if you will, here in the U.S. And I think folks within it are beginning to question sort of the theoretical and actual boundaries of that narrative. You know, it's not enough to just pay for $4 a bunch of kale at the farmer's market. That's not enough to transform a context, let alone transform a system or a society. And I think we have to push the narrative and reshift folks' perception to see initiatives like what's taking place here in Maryland or what's taking place within the Farm Workers Association and members within the Rural Coalition to say that our struggle in advancing our modes of production and our versions of reality is also your struggle. That in order for you, consumer or urban person, or whom is not in the production of food, to live and lead lives in which your food is coming from a production space of health, then your values can very well be aligned with ours along those lines, and that can open up a much larger dialogue. You know, so reshifting narratives and perception for the National Day of Action, and then, you know, to provide clear and concrete ways for support for some of these grassroots initiatives, and financial support, but also on-the-ground logistical support in ways in which we define them. And lastly, you know, I want to touch on just a point about understanding sort of our system of agriculture and when numbers come out. So the USDA is the largest body of statistical record keeping in the U.S. around agriculture. And when they put out their ag census, it's very important to understand that when people sign, they say I'm a farmer, there's no statistical data that talks about land ownership. So there's no way that the government is able to pull out and say, okay, this many people own land, and this is their racial or ethnic or cultural makeup. That 97th percentile came from African-American researchers out of the South, and it was a landmark study. There hasn't been one done since 1999, and that was one of the first ones of its kind. And it's very important to understand that, because those numbers that come out influence all of our analyses, but also influences policies and the way resources are allocated. And it's one thing to talk about resettling people in the countryside for food production, but it's a whole nother game to talk about agrarian reform and land reform and just radically distributing the way land is being concentrated in this country, which is, in my opinion, a landmark issue going back to 1492, the moment the first incision took place. So, you know, to highlight some of those issues in the National Day of Action would be critically important, but also for this call for us to keep in our consciousness that although I'll speak about land ownership, I'm not necessarily speaking about private land ownership. That's another level to move into, but also to reconsider in our language or analysis around transforming the food system or this particular model of agriculture as we transition to a more agri-ecological one. We need to be thinking about who owns and controls land, because those are who are going to be able to extract and use those resources however and to whomever they want to distribute them to. So that's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you, Blain, for those very wise words. And now I'd like to turn it over to our third presenter, who is not Rosalinda Guillen, as it says there, but Edgar Franks, also from the Community organization in Washington State. He serves as the coordinator for civic engagement. And we're very happy to have you here, Edgar. I'm not sure, are you able to do video? Edgar?
Hello? Hello?
Hi. Hi, we can hear you. Are you able? Are you at a computer able to do video, or?
I am not, unfortunately.
Okay. That's okay. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to you to speak for 10 to 15 minutes and share some of your perspectives with us. Thanks.
All right. So, yeah, I was just got brought on at the last minute by Rosalinda. She had to be taking care of some business regarding the campaign we're involved in right now with the farm workers. But I'll be able to talk a little bit about the questions that were forwarded to me about. These are the questions, right? We're talking about what is the reality of land and natural resources.
That's right.
Okay, so just making sure. So for right now, the reality here on the ground in Bellingham, Washington, and rural Whatcom and Skagit County, the places that we do most of our organizing and are focusing most of our efforts. The reality is, in the community that we're helping is where we represent as the farm workers, landless people, people that have been displaced through NAFTA, free trade policies, climate catastrophes that are happening primarily in Mexico, and land grabs that are happening in Mexico, and forcing people to come up to the United States, forced migration. So that's one aspect that's one of the realities that's happening here. The another thing that's happening here, and the realities is the access to land that prohibits formal landowners or people that used to live off, sustain themselves living off the land in their own home country, now are forced to sell their labor here at exploitative conditions. So that'd be either by being forced to be picking by piece rates, which sometimes don't amount to even minimum wage here, not having adequate housing, having to sleep in cars or whatever people could find to kind of shelter them for the night. So those are some of the realities that we're seeing and have been happening here for a long time. Access to healthy, culturally appropriate food is very difficult, and when you do find it, it's very expensive. It's right here, Bellingham and Whatcom County likes to think of itself as a pretty progressive community where food and organic food, especially in non-GMO food, it's a thing that we're trying to promote here locally with farmers markets, and even corporate chains are trying to push the organic kind of label onto people. But at the same time, the people that are picking all those fruits and vegetables and have no way of affording all those vegetables or fruits. So what ends up happening is people go wherever they can to get food, which is usually like food banks, that sell processed food that's unhealthy for farm workers and not culturally appropriate. So for us, that's one of our another reality that's happening around here, that the limited access to land, especially for displaced landless people, is affecting not only the way that we're surviving here, but also changing our traditional diets. So what we're trying to do here to kind of combat that is finding a way that farm workers can get access to those lands, either by trying to find a way if we can get cooperatives started, community-owned lands started, so people can actually not have to put up with exploitative conditions at their jobs, and they could be their own. They can pretty much be their own bosses and help find a way to sustain themselves, and also at the same time, not just to be financially secure, but at the same time promote and model the way that we want to be producing food by not using pesticides, by staying away from GMO seeds, and not having to go back to follow the trend that many corporate farms are starting to go to with using free trade as a way of doing business, and rather setting up the model of a solidarity economy here locally in Whatcom County. So those are kind of our big kind of long-term plans. Right now, we're in the process of establishing a couple of cooperatives. We had one that was established maybe I want to say last December, a little bit before Christmas. It was a Cooperativa Itaquiusi, which is a women farm worker-led cooperative that did catering, but the catering was all with organic, as best as we could try to find organic non-GMO products, and they would cook culturally appropriate foods for events here locally. It was going good. Right now, unfortunately, some of the members had to drop out because of family reasons. But right now they're on a break for a couple of months, and hopefully they'll reconvene by the end of the summer and keep that program going with Itaquiusi. Another one that we're trying to focus on is how to establish, we're trying to plan out how do we establish a local solidarity economy that's based on cooperation and people building and maintaining their own co-ops. We were really inspired by the New Economies Conference in Jackson, even though we weren't able to go. The plan that was laid out by Chokwe Lumumba and that kind of direction of having co-ops as a way to move away from the exploitative capitalist model of especially in this way of food production, is definitely the way that we want to go, and we want to see our community go. So we're really inspired. We were really inspired by what was going down in Jackson, Mississippi, and also in Detroit with the work that EMEAC and the organization that Charity is from. We were able to go there a couple months ago for a grassroots global justice membership convening. So, and we got to see the great work that people in Detroit were doing there, and as far as they themselves taking over empty lots and starting to produce food for their community. So we're really inspired, and that's one of the things that we want to reproduce here in Whatcom County. Even though there is tons of, I would say there's like lots of farms around here that people can get food available, but at the same time, the people that we're working with don't have access to that food or can't afford it. So we want to have those spaces and have those kind of follow that model of Detroit and Jackson, where communities can get together and figure out a plan where they can be sustaining themselves and also at the same time being mindful of the environment and what we're putting into our bodies. Are the types of actions our organization engages to address these issues? Well, right now we're in a big campaign to support farm workers in Burlington that have gone on strike since last summer. That is right now what takes us most of our resources and our time away to make sure the farm workers and that farm are able to get a union contract. Not only a union contract, but a contract that ensures that they get health benefits, that labeling gets put on their packaging of their where they work at, so people know what pesticides are being used and the workers are having to work in. So those are some of the demands that the workers are asking for, and the actions that they've and that we believe that gets those results is direct action, and that has been working. So either by doing boycott picket lines at grocery stores or petitioning directly to the Employment Security Department or Department of Labor, constant phone calls, marches, talking to legislators, talking to local businesses that's selling those products. We found that just a big combination of all those things really gets results. And I don't know if y'all heard the news, but yesterday they actually won a settlement with that company for $800,000 to settle a wage theft claim. So all the efforts that people put in, especially the direct action aspect of it, and making this a public issue, and not just battling it out in court or in traditional ways that people with using lawyers in courts and non-public campaigns usually do it. It worked for us to do it in a public manner, so there was a big public discourse happening where the community also got involved and started asking questions of the treatment of the farm workers and in the what conditions that they're working in. So for us, those actions, direct action for us really got the job done. And I think if we want to talk about a National Day of Action to support the work of grassroots organization, that would, I mean, anything that where we have a specific target that we want to go after, that'd be great. If we want to, I think Niaz mentioned it, to start shifting the conversation into we get to frame the conversation and not always be defensive, but this we start setting the agenda where people get to have to listen to what we're saying and we're not reacting. I think that's kind of like the best way of getting our message across, where we're not defending something, but we're like setting the tone and telling people what's really going on. But with that, I think that's all I got right now.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Edgar, and congratulations on the settlement.
Oh yeah, it's well, it wasn't really. It was. I want to say it's Familias Unidas por la Justicia. They're ones that've been leading. We're playing more of a supportive role.
Well, in any case, we're very happy to hear of the settlement. And so once again, thank you for all of our presenters. I'd like to open it up now to take a round of questions for the presenters, and then we can do one round, collect a few, and then we can let them take turns answering, and then we can open it up for broader conversation and debate to continue collectively framing this conversation. So I forgot to mention at the beginning, the idea is for this call to end at 1:45. So I'd like to stop with the open debate and then give Eric the floor at 30 minutes past the hour. So I can't see everybody to call on folks, so I'll just encourage you to jump in when you hear silence if you have a question, and I'll open the floor to the group.
This is Eric. Just quickly, thank you to all of the presenters. That was really educational. And Niaz, you didn't address in your short time the aspect of labor. I wonder if you could say a few things about how the industrialization and privatization of fisheries is affecting the labor force, and what kind of labor force is being introduced into that model of production and ownership.
Thanks, Eric. So, sorry, Niaz, I'm just going to collect a few questions and then give you guys each a chance to answer. So, also, I'd just like to remind folks to please mute your mic if you're not speaking, because there seems to be a bit of background noise, just to keep things as the audio as clear as possible. So, any other questions from the group? Or from presenter to presenter?
I'm interested in, and this could be something that might happen offline at some point, in hearing a little bit more about the issue of parity and how that plays into the work that Blain and Edgar are doing, and just to let Blain know we have an intern that's going to be working out of University of Maryland, and she wants to reach out to farmers and fishermen in the Eastern justice element of your work. So we may put you in touch with her if that's okay.
Great. Any other questions, or I can turn it over directly to Niaz to get us started? Okay, well, maybe you can go ahead and answer Eric's question, Niaz, and then move on to Blain.
Well, for those who haven't seen some of there was a story just recently. Thank you, Eric, for bringing up the issue of labor, by the way. There was a story just in the last couple of days in The Guardian about something we've known about for some time, which is the modern-day slavery that is happening in the fishing industry around the globe, particularly in, well, actually, I can't even say particularly in Asia, in Southeast Asia, or even in New Zealand, where we know people are literally being held bound in the hulls of ships and being forced to sign contracts they don't even understand, being exported from their countries to work on these fishing vessels or fish farms to essentially catch fish or raise fish and shrimp and others for those of us who already have access to other foods. And I'm glad that the issue is getting a little bit of press, but it's not solving it, because what we're dealing with right now is this false notion that that's the price we have to pay if we want to eat seafood, when people don't even know the real price. I feel like if people understood that there's child labor that comes with a side of wild farm shrimp from China, that there are people working in horrible conditions that are from Guatemala and New Bedford, Massachusetts, who are subject of hate crimes, who are being targeted for whether it's ICE activities, crackdowns from immigration, whether it's low pay, anything that you can imagine in an industrial meat packing facility, for example, where workers' rights are violated, everything from economics to social well-being of those workers. The example of New Bedford, I was just in New Bedford yesterday, so it's a topic of, and we don't have to go very far. I always tell people we talk about slavery conditions and we talk about some of these issues that fish workers are dealing with, and we often talk about them from faraway places, but it's happening right here. I'm in Providence, Rhode Island. It's happening 30 minutes north of me, and where I am right now, or east of me technically, where workers are being forced to work in environments that are not conducive to a healthy. They're walking from, the only way to get to work is to walk along this really dangerous path where people are literally waiting for them, and therefore they're subject of hate crimes. They're getting beaten up. Their community groups have asked for a bus line, and they're being refused a simple bus line so that they can walk from these industrial facilities to their homes in safety. And so there are a lot of labor issues, and then there's the economic justice element that is connected directly to labor, has to do with fair pay either for those who are working or the actual fishermen who may not have additional labor other than themselves. So it's everything you might imagine in the worst case scenario that we're seeing happen, particularly in these industrial fishing operations, and many of those operations are the ones that are getting rationalized through these privatization policies. So we're not only privatizing the right to fish and privatizing people's workspace, we're also saying that it's all okay that in the process we treat people like we are treating them today, and in ways that if we knew about it, we wouldn't tolerate it, but some of us don't want to hear about it. And let me just close with expanding on what we don't want to hear about. A couple of weeks ago, I was invited to speak at a gathering of hospital executives in charge of purchasing decisions. We've been talking about value-based purchasing, and I wasn't just talking about fisheries, I was also talking about agriculture. And we have to send in our slides ahead of time. And the association whose building we were meeting in would not allow 4 of my slides that had to do with slavery in our food system to be shown. They actually censored them. And so there is an element in our society that is in such denial, and the rest of us somewhat know it, but we don't really know it until we experience something like being in a group of otherwise intellectual people who consider themselves progressive, yet not being allowed to show 4 slides about slavery in our food system.
Thank you, Niaz. Would you like to respond, Blain, to Niaz's question?
Sure. Can you restate it?
Well, it's not actually, maybe it's not even a question. I was interested in hearing more about the economic justice element of how you're all dealing with that, and also just to make sure you knew that we have an intern who's going to be working on the Eastern Shore, particularly with the watermen, but our interest is also to see the parallels, the economic justice parallel, the issue of parity, being paid the cost of operation, and so forth, the similarities between farmers and fishermen. So if you're open to her reaching out to you, she might do that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, that'd be great. Yeah, so I farm on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, which is on part of the ancestral lands of Harriet Tubman. You know, she lived on she was held captive on a 3,000-acre plantation, and we're on 135 acres of that former plantation where her parents actually lived. There's a cottage in the back, a corn shack, where we actually believe where she may have been hiding out when she was coming back on her 3rd trip to pick up her parents. But in Maryland, right, historically, the Eastern Shore of Maryland used to be an area of diversified vegetable production. After all the timber was cut, the original slave labor was brought in to cut timber. Harriet Tubman was actually this swole, super buff, 5-foot black woman, not like a scrawny person holding a light that they see in picture books. But so that was sort of the progression of agriculture. And now today, after the food crisis in 2007, 2008, the price per bushel on corn and soy just skyrocketed. And it's continued to skyrocket. And what that has created is this upward push really on the cost of land all throughout the Eastern Seaboard, but particularly in Maryland, where they say the average acre price is like $11,000 an acre. But realistically, from what I've been seeing, it's on average around $33,000 an acre, which is just unrealistic for anybody to get into agriculture, let alone live in the countryside. So in situations like that, our only alternative for those of us that want to produce in the countryside is particularly to lease. And so all that to say that does drive up our cost of production. I was actually at this meeting between farm lenders and farmer organizations of color, and literally the only thing they said they could offer farmers were loans with low interest rates. And I started scratching my head, and I was like, well, I mean, surely there's other options than just a loan with a low interest rate that can support, you know, us on the margins getting into this realm of food production and culture building. And people looked at me like I was an alien to even say that. So I think we're struggling with sort of a decapacitated ability to imagine different ways to financially support some of these efforts. And I think a lot of it has to come down to values and character, or, you know, where I guess how people think of investment in agriculture, is particularly here in the U.S. on the Eastern Shore. And then lastly, just to close up, you know, in the next 20 years, they suggest that Oakland Institute and Center for Social Inclusion put out these numbers that came across a couple months ago saying that there's supposed to be 400 million acres going up for transition in the U.S. Within, well, we're in the moment, but in the next 15 to 20 years. And in communities of color, in the rural areas, for those of us that are there, we've been seeing this. But now it's really radically pervasive because, you know, they say the average landowner in the U.S. is supposedly 59 years old, 57 to 59. But in communities of color, what we're finding and what I've been finding, that age is like 65, 67 on the low end. And there's no children who want to come behind and pick that up. And the taxes are only increasing. And our elderly are being forced to work or put their land into conventional production. So that's how our system works. It either dispossesses or sort of subvertively sort of puts itself into the equation to bar us from getting into it. And by us, I mean, in this case, people of color, farm workers, fisher folk of color, indigenous, to get back onto land to thrive and to produce food. So all that is wrapped up into this sort of dynamic that we have to be very imaginative on how we're going to make this happen, because in this transition, if we look back in 20 years and we look backwards, we're going to have to ask ourselves, is this the kind of agriculture and land use system we want? Do we want more conventional, more agribusiness, or do we want agroecology and food sovereignty to exist in the rural countryside in this country?
So if I may, Blain, everything you just said, you could replace the word land, farmer, whatever, with, you just laid out the problems that we're dealing with and the situations that we're dealing with, from the aging of the industry to the lack of imagination applied to how to deal with the situation, when in reality what we need isn't any more loans and putting people more into debt. We need to change the policies that are the foundations for some of these bad decisions we're making. And so I wish some of those investor energies would go towards advocating for policy change. You know, puts your money into the community organizing efforts, not just putting fishermen and farmers in debt.
Thank you both. Just in the interest of not losing folks who have to leave at 30 past the hour, I'd like to first ask Stephen to briefly just give us a little snapshot of some of the work that's gone into this National Day of Action, and maybe as it's relevant to some of the conversations we're having today, just very briefly to get everybody on the same page who maybe has been more or less involved in that organizing. And then I'd like to turn it over to Eric Holt-Gimenez, food system researcher, agroecologist, and executive director of Food First, to offer some kind of synthesizing reflections and comments and perhaps questions. And then those of us who are able to stay on the call until quarter till can stay and debate and chat about some of the ideas that Eric brings up and the ones that we've already covered. So if that sounds okay with everybody, I'll just turn it over to Stephen very quickly to tell us a little bit about the National Day of Action and where we're at with that.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, this is Stephen Bartlett from Agricultural Missions, and we've been having a very good process of consultation, and we've had some amazing calls, hearing from people from the grassroots organizations and the various perspectives and strategies that are being utilized in this context. We're thinking now that this National Day, it will now be called a National Days of Action, because we have so many diverse communities with different kind of strategies, and we have different days that we might want to attach it to. So around the mid-October, we think, in general. We're hoping that, and I'd like to make a call out to those of you on the call, good minds, to think about the narrative. And I think that's come out real clearly in the narrative. We want to really promote and really put as much power and disseminate as widely as we can around the meaning of National Days of Action on land and resource. You could say land and resource access or defense of land. And so we welcome people to join this process. we have a number of communities that have been thinking really hard about how this day of action might come about, and it's still evolving. But we're really excited about having something fairly powerful take place this fall, in which a unified message can be amplified and disseminated, and to highlight some of the struggles that are taking place all in these various sectors and communities in the United States. I think it would be a great contribution to the world, food sovereignty movement, for us to make a splash and have our own narrative and our own voice from the grassroots here in the United States around land and resources. If there are others on the team who'd like to add more details or other ideas, I'd welcome that as well.
I think you've summarized it quite well. Thank you for that. So it looks like maybe, Elizabeth, if you could mute your mic, that would help the echo, and welcome to the call. So at the moment, I'm going to turn it over to Eric Holt-Gimenez to offer some reflections on this very rich conversation we've had so far, and maybe even throw out some questions for us to keep thinking about and talking about. So Eric, maybe around 10 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up again.
Yes. Well, thank you, everybody. And again, thank you again to our speakers. It's difficult to summarize all of this, but I think that there are a number of, there's a frame which pulls all this together, and I think it helps us to pull out the points in common moving forward, particularly for a National Day of Action. And I think that the first thing that all of these cases show us is that, we have a dysfunctional food system. People like to say it's broken. It's not broken. It's working precisely as a capitalist food system in a period of late capitalism is supposed to work. And I think that if you follow the thread from some of the historic examples which Blain introduced right up into the other examples for farm workers and fish workers, you can see that this is something which has been constructed over time. And when I say it's a food system now in a period of late capitalism, I don't mean that capitalism is about to fall. I mean that capitalism has moved from the primary means of acquiring wealth through production towards a means of acquiring wealth through dispossession, and it's called primary accumulation, and also through financialization. So that means that you can make more money by stealing land and resources and speculating with their value than you actually can make with the resources themselves through farming or through fishing. And so that's where the globalization has now taken us to a new level, and why there's a big rush on any resources which are not industrially held and can be privatized and financialized. So that's where there's waves and waves of dispossession of fish workers and farm workers, and it's what makes it so difficult for new farmers to get into farming and to stay in farming once they're in. I think that we're seeing, as a result, both Blain and Niaz mentioned inflation. We have land inflation, and we have fishing grounds, the inflation of the value of fishing grounds, which then creates, a barrier to entry and makes everything more expensive. So the resources that we need to fish and to farm are becoming more expensive. One of the things that I think is not evident, but is to all of us, but is the tremendous subsidy that peasant agriculture and farm workers provide the industry. And one is a direct labor subsidy, of course, through exploited and coerced labor in both the fishing and the farming industries. But also the fact that peasant farmers and family farmers tend to invest much more of their own money and time and effort into their product and tend to sell the product at a lower price internationally. And so that's another subsidy to the food system itself. I think that there are a number of things which also link these experiences that are important for us to take into consideration. And one is that what's happening around the world, and you can see this whether it's on the fishing banks or whether it's in the Pájaro Valley or near Bellingham or on the East Coast, is that it's the territorial restructuring. That basically all the rules and institutions are being restructured so the capital can extract wealth from a given area. So, it's one thing to talk about globalization and the IMF and the WTO and all this business, but those set the global frame. For capital to actually extract, it's got to change the rules right down to, to the councils and the city and the county level. So while it's almost impossible for us to influence the Farm Bill, for example, it's a pillar of capitalism, it's insulated by layers and layers of committees, we can engage in the local arenas of struggle and decision making. And so I also want to point out that the pervasive foundation of racism and white privilege through all of the food system, which, as the speakers pointed out, one of the problems with white privilege is just how blind people can be to their privilege, and how difficult it is to shift a conversation when people can't see you and can't see the problems. So I think that the actions have to engage directly with the problem of racism in this oppressive system and the problem of privilege, particularly white privilege. And the other thing is that what we're seeing is a sort of a long-term process of disenfranchisement through racism, primarily, in order to then be able to, political and social disenfranchisement, cultural disenfranchisement, in order to then coerce people through the market or through political means or through violence, direct violence, in order to dispossess. All of these are grabs. This is all dispossession, but dispossession is, by the time people are actually dispossessed of the land, of the fish, or the fishing grounds, or whatever, a whole process of disenfranchisement and coercion has taken place. So all of those steps need to be addressed in our strategies of resistance. And I think that we don't have to put up with this very regressive territorial restructuring. We can indeed advance platforms for progressive territorial restructuring, the redistributive territorial restructuring. So that means not just changing access to land or access to a particular fishing ground or whatever, but it's changing the rules and the institutions which right now favor extraction rather than and accumulation rather than redistribution. I think that the other thing is the externalities. Just as people of color are not seen, are invisibilized in this process, and poor people are invisibilized in this process, the externalities are all invisibilized. In other words, all the pollution and the social dislocation and disruption and the tremendous costs which this implies for society at large are all invisibilized. And so it's very important, I think, to show what these costs are, so that we build a broader allied base amongst with citizens who may not otherwise consider these issues to be particularly important. And I liked what was said about reaching out to other consumers and whatnot to show that if you really want healthy food, if you want a sustainable food system, if you want non-GMO fish and you want a sustainable fishing industry, you're going to have to build alliances with those who are being dispossessed, because they now have nothing left to lose, and you still have a lot left to lose. So I think there's that part of resistance is very important. The other part of those alliances are important for resistance. The other side of resistance, I think, was also mentioned, which has to also be a part of the Day of Action, I think, is construction of the alternatives, of the solidarity economies, of the other models for production and sustainable resource use. Resistance is always about construction and protest. It has to walk on two legs, and I think that has to be made very clear as we move into the Day of Action. So I would just like to close. I don't want to talk too much, because I think that the elements for a powerful Day of Action, which can be very broad-based and can reach not only more people and organizations within the food movement and educate many more people in the food movement to the real drivers behind the problems that we have in the food system and with land and whatnot. I think that the Day of Action can also reach out to a larger part of the general public, and I thoroughly support community-to-community's approach of having, a multifaceted strategy. Policy is one thing, but policy is based on politics, and politics includes direct action and lobbying and education and working in the community and a whole host of things. So I think that the Day of Action is clearly an opportunity for a very broad-based political action that can begin to move us along towards changing the rules and the institutions that favor this late capitalist extractivist mode, and bring us back to something which is much more redistributive and equitable. I think to me, I'll end with saying I think that the fact that people in the fisheries industry in Bellingham and on the farms are resisting is an extremely hopeful development, and that needs to be held up to provide others with hope. Things don't look optimistic at all. I'm very pessimistic about everything, but pessimism and optimism, optimism means you think things are going to work out the way you want them to. Hope is you do things because it's the right thing to do, and you hope that things work out. And I think that's what we have to lift up, as I think each of the speakers did today. And thank you all very much for that.
Thank you, Eric, for that, and for all of our speakers for being so good timekeeping. They're keeping your contributions very profound and precise. So,
I'm sorry,
those of you who are,
Zoe, I'm sorry. I just want to end with one last point, and that is that the trend for dispossession, of course, is privatization of everything, privatization of our minds, and that's true. So the challenge for us in resistance is to reconstruct a public sphere. Many people, young people, never got a chance to live during a time when there was a healthy public sphere. where things were decided by people and citizens rather than just the market. And so I think that part of resistance is that reconstruction of a public sphere in the form which we think is most equitable and most sustainable and most redistributive. If we don't reconstruct that public sphere, we're always going to get clobbered in the market by people who go for market-based solutions. And so I think that that has to be part of the reivindication within the discourse of a day of action.
Thank you. Important point. So for those of us who are able to stay on for just 10 more minutes, I'd like to open it up again for any contributions from presenters or from the group generally, questions, comments, responses, ideas, and then we'll close in about 10 minutes. So would anyone like to contribute?
This is Niaz, actually. I want to thank Eric for summarizing things so well and just drawing those parallels, and particularly the part about resistance is just really sitting well with me, because I feel that is what we need to do. The challenge we have is getting the general public, which I agree is the broader base that we need to bring into this conversation, to essentially delete what they've been told so that they can absorb some new information that will help them resist. And if the day of action can be somewhat focused on how do we popularize these messages in a way that they can reach the most number of people, let's not look at the language for the day of action with an eye towards the choir. Let's look at it beyond ourselves, even let go of some of our own language to be able to bring the broadest number of people on board. That might prove to be a huge service to all of our various movements that are now in the best way colliding and collaborating.
Thank you for that. Any other thoughts or constructive ideas for the National Day of Action based on some of the conversation we've had today? Yes, also I'll just echo that what Paulo put in the chat box. If you're interested in joining the process of planning and building the National Days of Action, please do let us know if you're not already involved. We will. Okay, well, unless there are other comments, then I'd like to thank all of our speakers, Blain, Niaz, Edgar, and also Eric, for some really great thought-provoking conversation today. And I would also like to thank Stephen and Lottie for the very powerful litany, and once again for the important dedication of this call to Charity Hicks. So we'll all be in touch about the future plans with the National Days of Action. Are there any other announcements that need to be made before we close the call?